They stood on the stage I built, under my spotlight, accepting my award, smiling for a project I had poured my soul into. And they didn't even mention my name. Not once. I stood in the back of the auditorium, trembling as the applause thundered for Damon and his new creative partner, Tessa Lang, my fiancé and my protégé, the man I had trusted, the woman I had mentored. He'd stolen my research pitch, erased my name from every file, and handed it to her. And she wore it like she earned it. They kissed as cameras flashed. The world cheered, and I walked out of the building, heels silent, dignity shattered. That night, I packed my things and disappeared. No press, no confrontation, just grief and silence. But when fate gave me a second chance, back before the betrayal, I didn't run. I stayed, and I planned. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was different. My fingers gripped the edge of my desk, the desk I no longer owned, in an office I hadn't seen in months. The calendar was 3 weeks before the betrayal. My coffee was still warm, my email still unread. I scrolled quickly and saw it, my original proposal draft, still intact. They hadn't stolen it yet. My heart thundered. I wasn't crazy. I was reborn, given the chance to stop the theft before it happened. I closed the email slowly, the corners of my lips curling. Damon and Tessa thought they'd fooled me once. But this time, I wouldn't just protect what was mine. I'd let them reach for it, just enough to expose themselves. And then I'd burn everything they stole, while the world watched them beg. They stole my work. Now I'd make them regret ever touching it. In my past life, I had trusted Damon blindly. I believed love meant loyalty, that shared ambition meant shared success. But in reality, he was never building with me. He was building off of me. And Tessa, she shadowed my moves, studied my thoughts, and smiled as if she were grateful. I thought mentoring her was noble. It was naive. But now I had knowledge they didn't, and knowledge was power. I spent the next 2 days quietly reviewing every document I'd ever shared with them, flagging files, moving key drafts into private drives, encrypting folders. At the same time, I played dumb, smiled in meetings, praised Tessa's ideas, kissed Damon's cheek, let them think I was still the fool. Because nothing terrifies a thief more than a victim who stops screaming. I wasn't going to scream this time. I was going to let them dig their own grave, and then hand them the shovel. At lunch, Damon leaned across the table and asked, "You're not overworking, are you? You've been quiet lately." I smiled sweetly, just focused. You know me. He grinned like he knew everything. He didn't. I watched as he casually slid his hand over mine, the same hand that would later delete my name from our shared cloud drive. I studied his eyes, his smile, the lies layered in every gesture. And yet, I didn't feel pain this time. I felt power, because I saw it coming. And more importantly, I had already begun rerouting the outcome. That night, I made backup copies of every draft he thought he controlled. I reached out to a private firm to register the IP rights under my solo name. Quietly, legally, thoroughly. Damon wanted my work. Tessa wanted my name. They could have neither. And soon, they would lose everything they tried to steal. The trap needed bait, and I was happy to dangle it. The next week, I accidentally left my laptop open during a meeting. Tessa's eyes darted to the screen. My notes, my projections, my next pitch draft. She bit her lip and asked, "Is that the new pitch you mentioned?" I nodded. Early stages. Still raw. She smiled too wide. "You always come up with the best ideas. I don't know how you do it." I shrugged. Instinct, I guess. I closed the laptop slowly and left the room, knowing she would sneak back in within the hour. I had left a decoy file, brilliant on the surface, but flawed beneath. A pitch so close to perfect, anyone desperate for credit would take it. Damon and Tessa wouldn't be able to resist. And once they presented it as their own, I'd expose every plagiarized word, publicly, permanently, with receipts. A week later, Damon came home smiling like a man who thought he'd won. The execs loved it, he said. Tessa nailed the presentation. They want to move forward immediately. I tilted my head. That's great, I said gently. I knew it had potential. He blinked, surprised. You're not mad. Why would I be? I asked. You said it was hers. I watched him carefully. His pupils flicked sideways. The lie tasted familiar on his tongue. Well, she added a lot. You've been busy lately. I nodded slowly. Of course. That night, I sent a private email to the head of the innovation board, requesting a meeting. I included timestamps, metadata, drafts, every piece of evidence they needed. I didn't rage. I didn't beg. I let facts do the talking. When someone steals from you, they expect tears. I gave them paper trails and press coverage instead. The meeting was scheduled quietly. Damon and Tessa didn't suspect a thing. On the day of their big announcement, I arrived early, dressed in navy silk and quiet confidence. I greeted the executives, handed them printed documents, and said calmly, before today's presentation, I think there's something you should see. I showed them the original files, timestamps, the pitch's evolution, my signature, my voice recordings. Then I showed them the decoy, the flaws they hadn't caught, the intentional errors I had left in for one reason, to prove they never understood the concept. One executive leaned back, stunned. Another cursed under his breath. They tried to launch this tomorrow, he said. The media's already booked. I sipped my coffee. Then I'd suggest postponing. Or better yet, replacing them. No threats, no emotion, just facts and silence. And the truth landed heavier than any scream ever could. That afternoon, I watched from a distance as Damon and Tessa were called into the boardroom. Their faces were still smug until the door closed. 10 minutes later, they came out pale, eyes wide. Damon saw me in the hallway. He took a step forward. Claire, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said. You handed my success to her, and I just took it back. Tessa's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked like a child caught copying answers on an exam. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the panic, the guilt, the betrayal. They hadn't just lost the pitch. They lost credibility, funding, and their spots on the innovation board. It wasn't sabotage. It was justice. And the best part, I never had to raise my voice. I just made sure their ambition led them exactly where it belonged, into their own downfall. By evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Damon. Please, we didn't mean to hurt you. I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting it without a reply. Then I blocked his number. I didn't want an apology. I wanted space. And now I had it, not just from him, but from the version of myself who once clung to him out of love, loyalty, and blind faith. That version of me was gone. She died the day they used my work to lift themselves. And I was reborn the day I stopped needing to be seen by people willing to erase me. Let them watch now. Let them both sit in the ruins of what they tried to steal, because I had reclaimed every piece of it, quietly, legally, and without mercy. The media got wind of the scandal within days. A leaked internal memo revealed that Damon and Tessa's pitch was under investigation for intellectual property theft. A few reporters quietly reached out to me for comment. I gave none. My silence became its own kind of headline. Claire Monroe refuses to comment, letting the evidence speak for her. That restraint made them curious, even reverent. People didn't want loud vengeance. They wanted quiet power. I gave them that. And just as I predicted, curiosity turned into admiration. Influencers praised the way I handled the situation. Industry leaders cited me as a cautionary tale turned triumph. And Damon? He spiraled. He posted a weak apology online, framing the scandal as a misunderstanding. But the comments were brutal. She built you. You stole from the wrong woman. Tessa tried to deny everything. It only made her look more guilty. By the end of the week, they were both dropped from their consulting contracts. Their names were blacklisted by the same people who once toasted their brilliance. Meanwhile, the board offered me something Damon always coveted: full leadership of the innovation branch I'd helped build from the ground up. I accepted, but with one condition. I wanted full creative control and the freedom to select my own team. They agreed without hesitation. And I knew exactly who I'd call: young women like I used to be. Hungry, overlooked, undervalued. I gave them desks, power, purpose, because my success wouldn't just be about reclaiming what was stolen. It would be about building something they could never tear down again. And every time I walked past the office Damon once sat in, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. I had become the woman he feared I would one day be: untouchable. One evening, I received an anonymous tip. A pitch deck nearly identical to mine had been submitted to a smaller firm, under Tessa's name. I smiled coldly. Desperation made people sloppy. I forwarded the tip to legal. Within 48 hours, a cease and desist order was issued. Tessa issued a tearful Instagram video claiming she was set up. No one believed her. Comments were locked. Her brand deals vanished. She'd spent so long mimicking me, she forgot how to be anything else. Meanwhile, I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech summit. The topic: building what they tried to steal. I opened my speech by saying, sometimes success isn't about fighting harder. It's about stepping back and letting people reveal who they are. The applause was deafening. Afterward, a teenage girl in the crowd told me, "You made me believe I don't have to be silent anymore." That more than revenge was everything. Damon tried to contact me again, this time through a mutual friend. He wanted to apologize in person. I declined, because what I needed was never his apology. What I needed was mine, to myself, for staying silent when I should have spoken, for giving loyalty to people who used it like currency, for abandoning my own instincts just to keep peace. But I had made peace now, not with them, but with the version of me who allowed it. I no longer needed them to admit what they did. The whole world already knew. I walked into rooms now and saw heads turn, not out of scandal, but out of respect. That shift was louder than any confrontation, because I hadn't just survived betrayal. I'd thrived in spite of it, and that wasn't something either of them could ever take back. At a private event with other founders, one woman leaned in and asked, "How did you stay so composed? I would have burned it all down." I smiled gently. I did burn it, but I controlled the flame. That was the secret they never saw coming. Damon expected screaming. Tessa expected a catfight. Instead, I gave them silence, evidence, and strategy. They weren't ruined by revenge. They were ruined by their own arrogance. And the world watched them crumble, not because I exposed them, but because I refused to protect them anymore. There's a difference, and it's one they learned too late. The best revenge, I discovered, wasn't destruction. It was reinvention. And I was no longer the woman they betrayed. I was the one they underestimated. And that in this world was the most dangerous kind of woman to be. One rainy morning, I passed a cafe where Damon and I used to meet. He was there, alone, soaked, typing on a battered laptop. He didn't see me, and I didn't stop. He looked smaller, diminished. I remembered when he'd sit across from me, feeding off my ideas like they were oxygen. Now he gasped alone, and I was heading to a meeting with investors who wanted to fund my new startup. I didn't hate him. I didn't pity him. I just felt nothing. And that emptiness, it felt like peace. Tessa's social pages went dark not long after. Word was she moved to another city, trying to start over. But your reputation, once stained in truth, always follows. And every opportunity she chased turned cold once my name came up. That wasn't sabotage. That was consequence. Later that year, I was featured on the cover of an industry magazine, Claire Monroe, the voice they tried to silence. Inside, I shared my story, not as a victim but as a builder. I don't want to be known for what they did to me. I wrote, I want to be known for what I built anyway. The article went viral. Universities requested guest lectures. Mentorship programs asked for my guidance. I accepted them all, not to prove myself, but to make sure no other woman had to start from scratch after being erased. Damon's fall was fast. Mine was never the story. The real story was my return, my rebuild, my refusal to disappear just because someone else thought they deserved my crown. And that, I realized, would be my legacy, not the theft but the reclamation. A year after the scandal, I stood on the same stage where Damon and Tessa once accepted my award. But this time, it was mine. Officially, properly, publicly. I wore emerald green, a color that screamed regrowth, and looked out at a crowd that was actually cheering for the right person. I didn't talk about them in my speech. I didn't need to. I talked about failure, about silence, about how it's never too late to reclaim what's yours. And when I stepped off that stage, I knew I had finally come full circle. Not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd gotten clarity, control, and closure. They tried to rewrite my story, but I snatched the pen back, tore out the pages they forged, and wrote the ending myself. The irony of it all hit me one morning while sipping tea in my new corner office, decorated not with power, but with peace. I had always dreamed of this life, but in my old self, I thought I needed someone beside me to achieve it. Damon with his charm, Tessa with her ambition. I believed we'd build something together. I didn't realize they were building it on me. Now, here I was with my name on the door, my vision on the walls, and no one beside me except the reflection of a woman who no longer apologized for being strong. I had become the version of myself I once thought would be too much for people to love. But I didn't shrink. I expanded. And in doing so, I discovered something far better than love from the wrong person. I discovered wholeness within myself. But even wholeness doesn't mean isolation. It means you no longer settle. And when Lucas entered my life, a finance consultant with a sharp mind and steady gaze, I didn't chase him. I didn't bend to fit him. I watched, waited, and when he showed up again and again, not as someone who wanted to own my light, but reflect it, I allowed him in. Slowly, cautiously. He never asked about the scandal. He only said, I've seen what happens when people steal your shine. I'd rather stand in it with you. It wasn't poetic. It was honest. We had long walks and long silences. He didn't fill every gap. He respected them. And that was how I knew he was different. I had been used to men who consumed me. Now I stood beside someone who saw me and didn't flinch when I stood tall. One evening, after a company dinner, we walked under city lights, our hands brushing, then holding. You know, Lucas said, "You don't carry bitterness." I glanced up at him. I carried it once. It almost buried me. "What made you let go?" I paused, because I realized bitterness still meant I was letting them occupy space in my story, and they didn't deserve even a paragraph. He nodded. "So, what chapter are you writing now?" I smiled. "One where I don't chase closure. I am closure." We stopped walking then, the city humming around us. And he leaned in, not forcefully, not urgently, but gently, asking with his silence if it was okay. And when I met him halfway, it wasn't fireworks. It was something better, steady, earned, and safe. Still, there were days the past whispered back. A message from someone who had once laughed at me. A headline bringing up the old scandal. A photo of Tessa trying to rebrand herself again. But I had built armor made from every disappointment they'd handed me. Not the kind that hardened me, but the kind that reminded me I survived. On one particular morning, I walked past a bookstore and saw a memoir titled Behind the Smile, Recovering from a Public Fall. Damon's face was on the cover. I didn't stop. I didn't even blink, because no book could rewrite what the world already knew. And no chapter could reclaim the one I had authored in real life. He would always be the man who tried to steal someone else's voice to fill his own silence. And I would always be the woman who spoke louder by walking away. Lucas eventually met my parents. My father, protective as ever, pulled him aside and said, "She doesn't need rescuing. Don't mistake her silence for weakness." Lucas smiled and replied, "She's not the one who needs saving, sir. She's the one I'm learning from." That night, I realized something simple but powerful. I hadn't just taken my power back. I had changed the standards of every room I entered. The people around me were now reflections of who I had become, not who I used to tolerate. That was real healing, not a pretty quote or an Instagram caption, but a shift so deep, your environment starts to transform because you refuse to accept less. Damon and Tessa had settled for shortcuts. I had chosen self-respect. And now, even the air around me carried a different weight. Lighter, clearer, unapologetically mine. Months passed. My startup tripled in valuation. We expanded globally. Our mission remained the same. Amplify the voices people try to mute. During one investor event, someone asked, "Do you have any regrets?" I answered truthfully, only that I didn't stand up for myself sooner. But I don't regret losing them. I regret staying as long as I did thinking I had to. That honesty hit harder than any rehearsed PR line, because it came from a place I once thought would destroy me, but instead became my foundation. Damon once tried to erase me. Tessa tried to replace me. But no one can replicate something that was built with authenticity. That's why they failed. And it's why I'll keep rising. Because I've made peace with the fall. Now, I only rise for myself. On the 1-year anniversary of their betrayal, I didn't post anything dramatic. No "look at me now" messages. No shadowy digs. I simply uploaded a picture of my new office plaque, Claire Monroe, founder and CEO. No caption. The engagement skyrocketed. People filled the comments. She did it with grace. They should have known better. This is what real success looks like. I read each comment slowly, not to feed my ego, but to honor how far I'd come. Once, I thought I had to shout to be heard. Now I whispered, and the world leaned in. That was the true full circle. Not revenge, not reclaiming the spotlight, but standing so confidently in my own story that no one else could ever rewrite it again. The further I rose, the less I thought about them. Damon's name became a footnote, not a wound. Tessa's silence replaced her arrogance. I no longer needed to track their downfall. They had already arrived at it. What mattered now was impact. The foundation I started for young women in STEM had reached over 10,000 students across the country. I hosted free workshops. I funded startup grants. And in every classroom I entered, I saw a girl who had once been me, doubting her worth, holding back her brilliance, afraid to be seen. I didn't tell them about Damon. I told them about boundaries, about instinct, about choosing spaces that value their voice. You don't owe loyalty to people who shrink you, I told them. And you don't owe silence to people who steal from you. My pain had become purpose, and my voice no longer trembled when I used it. Lucas stood beside me at our third community launch, watching as little girls held tablets and coded their first projects. "You made this happen," he whispered. "No," I said. "They did. I just cleared the space for them." That was what Damon never understood. He thought power came from taking up space. But real power, it comes from creating it for others. From lifting, not hoarding. From leading, not controlling. Damon hoarded credit and left ruins. I built platforms and planted legacy. The difference echoed in every headline. Claire Monroe, the quiet revolution. The woman they erased, now the voice everyone follows. At night, when I rested my head beside Lucas's, I didn't relive old betrayals. I dreamed of what else I could build, how far I could go. I had been stolen from. Then I rebuilt. And now, nothing felt impossible. One day, I ran into an old friend from my intern days, Melissa. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You're unrecognizable," she said. I smiled. "That's the goal." She paused, lowering her voice. "I used to think Damon made you. But now, it's so clear you were the architect all along." I nodded. He was just holding the blueprint. We chatted for a while. She updated me on people I no longer followed. Some had grown, others hadn't. But as we said goodbye, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for leaving loud enough that we could follow." That stayed with me, not because I needed praise, but because I realized something profound. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't just for you. It gives others permission to do the same. Damon and Tessa may have stolen my success once, but now I was giving success away to those who deserved it. Weeks later, a university invited me to give a commencement speech. As I stood before hundreds of graduates, I thought about the woman I was the day Damon presented my stolen work. I thought of how I'd wanted to scream, but didn't. How I'd left in silence and vanished. That silence had once felt like defeat. Now it felt like power. Sometimes, I told the crowd, they'll clap for the wrong people. Sometimes, they'll crown the thief while you sit in the shadows. But trust this. When you rise with truth in one hand and grace in the other, you don't just return. You redefine the entire room. The crowd rose in applause. But what moved me most wasn't the ovation. It was the line of young women afterward, eyes shining, saying, "You showed us how to fight without losing ourselves." That was more valuable than anything they'd ever stolen. Tessa eventually resurfaced under a new brand. Different look, new name, but the industry hadn't forgotten. Her reputation followed her like smoke, impossible to hide, impossible to wash off. Damon tried consulting abroad, but faded into irrelevance. He could no longer sell brilliance he never built. One day, a journalist asked if I wanted to comment on his bankruptcy filing. I declined. What was there to say? His story wasn't mine anymore. I didn't need to watch them fall. I had already risen. I hadn't just survived betrayal. I had built beyond it. The ones who stole from me would spend years trying to rebuild. But no empire forged in deceit ever lasts. Mine was made from truth, scars, and a refusal to disappear. and that made it unshakable. Lucas and I never rushed. Love, this time, was slow, built not from chaos but from clarity. There were no grand confessions. Just moments, quiet ones, where we stood side by side, choosing each other. One evening, I found a note he'd left in my bag before a big pitch. No matter how loud the world gets, I'll be the quiet place you can return to. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because this time, I knew what love was. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't admiration dressed as control. It was presence, patience, peace. Damon once loved the version of me who shrank to fit him. Lucas loved the version of me who refused to shrink at all. And that was the only kind of love I would ever accept again. The foundation hit its 5-year mark. The board threw a gala in my honor, but I kept it intimate. No press, no spectacle. Just the people who built it with me. As I stood before them, I said only this. They tried to take everything from me. But the only thing they truly destroyed was their access to me. Laughter, claps, cheers. But deep inside, I felt still, centered. Damon and Tessa were no longer weights on my shoulders. They were dust behind me. I didn't carry them. I carried the lesson. And that lesson had taught me how to build an empire where no one had to beg to be credited. And how to become the kind of woman who doesn't just survive betrayal, she rewrites the definition of success because of it. Years passed. The company grew. I spoke in countries I'd never visited before. I saw my programs change lives in real time. And yet, I never forgot the quiet moment in a bathroom stall when I once sobbed after Damon's betrayal, when I thought it was all over. That girl, fragile and discarded, had become the woman behind an empire, not because of vengeance, but because she stopped waiting for someone to save her. I kept a photo of her in my journal, not to remember the pain, but to remember the fire that started everything. They stole my crown, so I made my own. And every time the world said I couldn't lead without them, I responded by rising higher, quietly, relentlessly, beautifully. One winter afternoon, a stranger approached me after a panel. She looked nervous, her voice shaking. "I'm building something," she said, "but I keep thinking of walking away. People keep taking credit for my work." I took her hand. "Don't give them your silence. Take up space. Take up credit. And if they try to steal your success, remember, it's only because they have none of their own." She teared up and nodded. That moment echoed something I'd once needed to hear. Back then, no one told me I had the right to be loud, to own, to reclaim. Now, I was the one reminding others. That's what survival becomes when it's complete. It transforms into mentorship, into legacy. Lucas and I eventually moved into a small home outside the city. It wasn't flashy. It was full of books, coffee mugs, quiet mornings, and long walks. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, he said, "Do you ever think about them?" Sometimes, I answered, but not with anger. More like curiosity. I wonder if they finally learned why stealing someone else's light never makes you shine. He nodded. They probably haven't. Maybe not, I said. But that's not my story to fix anymore. He leaned over, pressed a kiss to my temple. "You've already rewritten yours." And he was right. I didn't get justice in a courtroom. I got it in the fact that I lived a life bigger than the one they tried to steal. One spring, I was invited back to the company where it all started, the same one that nearly erased me. But things had changed. New leadership, a new culture, and the new director, a woman, greeted me with pride. "We study your case in our ethics training," she said, "not as a cautionary tale, but as a turning point." She handed me a plaque for reminding us what integrity looks like. I stood there, humbled, The same space that once erased my name now honored it. I didn't need their recognition to feel whole. But seeing the shift meant something. It meant that fighting back, even silently, had planted seeds I never got to see bloom. Until now. Damon was eventually interviewed on a low-tier podcast. Someone sent me the clip. He looked older, worn. He spoke of mistakes and regrets, but avoided naming names. I let good things slip away, he said. I thought I was the genius. Turns out, I was just close to one. I didn't finish the interview. I didn't need to. The past had already closed like a book I no longer reread. He could spend a lifetime apologizing and still not deserve a reply. Because closure wasn't a conversation. It was choosing not to go back, even in your thoughts. And I'd already walked too far to turn around. Tessa? No one knew. Some said she changed industries. Others claimed she tried to start fresh under a new identity. But everywhere she went, someone remembered. The internet never forgets a fraud. She tried to wear a crown that wasn't hers, and when it broke, it cut deeper than she expected. I didn't smile at her fall. I didn't gloat. I simply stayed silent. And that silence screamed louder than any public takedown. The world handled what I never needed to. I simply kept building while they scrambled to stay visible. On the 10th anniversary of my company, I hosted a private dinner. Just my team, my friends, my family. No influencers, no press, just love. As I raised a glass, I said, they thought they took everything, but what they gave me was a blank slate. And from that, I built something even they couldn't imagine. The table clapped, but the moment wasn't about them. It was about me, standing in the ruins of what had once been betrayal, and realizing it had all become a garden. Later that night, I found the first draft of the pitch they stole. I'd kept it in a folder marked proof. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I walked to the fireplace and burned it, not out of anger, but because I didn't need proof anymore. I had already become it, in every woman I'd mentored, in every stage I stood on, in every room that now knew my name. That pitch no longer defined me. It had just been the spark. I was the flame. Somewhere out there, Damon might still be blaming bad luck. Tessa might still be reinventing herself. But I wasn't watching. I was living. I was building. I was leading. My story didn't end with betrayal. It began there. And now, every chapter after that was mine, authored by a woman who refused to be erased. A woman who turned silence into strategy and loss into legacy. I don't remember the moment I stopped hurting. Maybe it was slow. Maybe it was the day I gave a girl a laptop and said, "You build it your way." Or maybe it was the day I looked in the mirror and no longer saw someone trying to prove herself. Just someone herself. Full. Free. Fierce. I never needed Damon's praise. Or Tessa's gratitude. What I needed, what I finally gave myself, was permission to take up space. And once I took it, I never gave it back. Now, when people ask me what I would say to the woman I was before the betrayal, I say this: let them take their fake crowns. Let them play queen with borrowed thrones. Your empire won't be built by applause. It'll be built by every moment you refuse to be erased. Keep going. Keep building. Keep rising. They'll try to take what you've earned, but they'll never steal who you've become.